Museums aren't just places with cool artifacts. They're places where we tell our history, we dream about our future. But what happens when key institutions like the Smithsonian or other places where we hold public memory are edited or even cut? Today we're here with Dr. Brown-Coronel from the Department of History to help us make it make sense. Let's start with the big picture. What are the Smithsonian museums and what are the roles that they play in educating the public?
So the Smithsonian is a museum complex. It's actually made up of 21 different museums and the National Zoo. And many of these museums are in the National Mall, so located in Washington, D.C. But what they do collectively is they preserve the developments and the advancements and the kind of achievements of the United States as a nation. So this ranges from scientific exploration and research. So they're research institutions as well as conservation efforts in terms of art, right? And then they are just a whole kind of historical arm. So some folks have referred to the Smithsonian as the nation's attic, right? So where collections that track this history of the country are preserved, they're curated, they're put on display for the public to see. They're all free for entry. So I think it's a pretty important part of our country.
Wonderful.
So I think that one of the reasons why the Smithsonian plays such a prominent role in our country is that it's sort of the archive, right? It's the documentation of the country's past. And, there's a saying that what is the key to a democracy is an informed democracy, right? So when we have records, when we have interpretations of our past, it's just a better informed citizenry who can then participate in our democracy.
Great. You were just there during spring break. What was your favorite exhibit and what made it stand out?
So I've been to the museum several times, and yes, I did visit over spring break. I visited the National Museum of American History. My favorite exhibit is one called Many Voices, One Nation. And this is an exhibition that uses the lens of migration to capture all kinds of different stories, like what results from folks who move. So this includes people who were forcibly, relocated, like during slavery. It also includes a story of what happens when different cultures and peoples encounter one another. I had a chance to consult on this exhibition when it was under development. Wow. I do research on Spanish-speaking women in 19th century California, and they were here under Mexico. And so when the United States takes over California, I wrote about what their experiences were. So they are featured, this family that I research is featured in this exhibition to talk about what happens when communities encounter one another. Sometimes it's tense, sometimes it's harmonious, but it's kind of a negotiation and something new is created, right? Yeah. So I really love this exhibit because it takes that idea through different historical moments of the United States.
Could you paint a picture? Like how does it do that? Like what's the exhibit look like?
Right. So it starts during the colonial era, right? And it talks about First Nations, the folks who first inhabited the United States or what later becomes the United States. It talks about people who are forcibly, moved to the United States. It talks about, our Puritans and Pilgrims and, those people who migrated to the United States in that early period. So it's a very kind of community-based and locally driven storyline. So, for example, when it comes to what later becomes the U.S. West, they're looking at Spanish Mexican communities in California, the Nez Perce and the Pacific Northwest, right? And all these different communities that kind of came into contact with American settlers. So it's very kind of a collection of microhistories. Yeah. It looks like it looks at a panaderia in 20th century Los Angeles, right? Or a doctor's family from South Asian. So it's a mix. It's greatly diverse, but then everybody can kind of relate to this theme of moving, right? Yeah. Migration, of settling somewhere new, which is a pretty universal experience.
Yeah. Wonderful. Let's talk about the elephant in the exhibit hall. A new executive order signed that directly addressed the Smithsonians. And I'd love for you to tell us, what does it say and what impact might it have?
Right. So the executive order is actually, I'll share with you what it's called, right? It's
Yeah.
called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History.
Mm.
And the executive order can be summed up in pretty much three different efforts. So first, it seeks to concentrate any sort of resources that come from Congress that go to the Smithsonian, right? So the first part is the Smithsonian, that it won't feature content or information that divides American people by race.
Okay.
Right? So that's the first part. Or promote programs or ideologies inconsistent with federal law. It seeks to celebrate the achievements of women, but it does not recognize men as women. So any sort of content is very narrow, right, in terms of gender ideology and gender identity. The second part, it seeks to restore truth to American history, and this is to reinstate any sort of monument or memorial that was questioned or taken down after the 2020 protests. So here in California, we had statues from Univero Serra that were taken down. In the U.S. South, and in other locations, Confederate monuments were taken down, and so the executive order also seeks to reinstate these. And then the last part is any sort of future project is to kind of make sure these ideologies. So it's going really back to an idea that there is one narrative of history, right? And that this narrative of history is a story of progress, right? That it seeks to say it's only about the good things that happened, and it's very kind of limiting into the perspective of one particular viewpoint.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's a little bit of a antiquated approach to history.
Yes.
And it serves these other means.
I'm thinking through, first of all, mind blown as somebody, you and I both teach early American history.
Yeah.
You go further than I do, but I'm trying to think through how one would even teach or represent history under those guidelines.
Yeah.
And maybe using the exhibit you laid out, what do you think might change in our view? Let me say it this way. What might be a version? I can't even get my head around this. Like, what does it look like? Right? Like, So, is it here? Let me ask you this way. I'm thinking about the exhibit that you talked about going to in spring about migrations in American history. And I'm thinking about, would this order make it impossible to talk about slavery? Would this order make it impossible to highlight the Panderia, like you mentioned? Like, what do you imagine might be the impact of this order? Or something related to this. I just, like, my mind is exploding. What might be erased from American history if this was faithfully abided by?
I think what's most at stake is the nuance and the texture of the human experience, right? And of the past. So even among people we think may belong to the same group or the same gender or the same class or however preoccupation of divisiveness, right? Even within that, there's such a texture to the human experience. And I think that in search of the main narrative, right, of one whole narrative, quote unquote, the typical, right? Like that's not really the interesting stuff, right? It's the atypical. It's the how did people negotiate different moments in their life. And it also assumes that they were always of one position, right? Like, so I think on a very granular level, there is that nuance and that texture and that those stories that get lost. I mean, you and I know, sitting with our students, that they don't have just one same experience because they come to Cal State Fullerton, because they come from Anaheim. They have all these variations, and it's those individual stories. And I think that exhibit, Many Voices, One Nation, is unique in that way, is because you can't get around, like, that's that was the story. That was
Mm-hmm.
these community histories, these individual histories that taken collectively together really kind of give us a sense of the past.
Yeah.
Right. So I
Yes.
think that's what's most at stake is to get that lost.
Yeah.
Right. We're gonna go
Beautiful.
back to these old textbooks, right? Like
Yeah.
and just talk about George Washington. Like, well,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that doesn't really work.
Totally. You are a public historian, so I'm curious, like, what are the tools that you employ and your approaches that you employ that will ensure that history is still told in an accurate way?
I think we keep doing the things we've been doing as historians.
Right.
So first, it's all grounded in research and evidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is no kind of one truth, right? Like, what exactly does that mean? Is there evidence?
Yes.
Is there historical evidence? So, with my students, this is the first thing we tackle is like, what is the evidence? What are the sources? And let's track our research. So that's first and foremost, and it arms us almost, right? To continue to tell these stories. I think another thing we do is we continue to focus on community-based histories, right? Like the local stories that are so important that come together. Some of my students just presented on Friday. We're in a partnership with California State Parks, and one of the graduate students, Mark Avesilla, he said when posed with the question about, kind of false histories or stories or fact and fiction, he said you have to go with what the communities have told us,
Right.
what they have told us through their lived experience in the past that is traced in the records and the documents and the evidence, and then also what they're saying today, what is meaningful to them. So I think these community-based histories are really important and cannot be negated.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a thematic approach, right, to history, which makes the way in which we study the past relevant to as many people as possible.
Yeah.
There is a National Museum of the American Indian.
Yeah, I was lucky to be living in Baltimore when that was being opened in, about 2000. And I was teaching a Native American history course. And we all got to go to that museum. And what's so fascinating to me about these museums is they're really a place where you get to focus on identity and the place of a group in American history.
Right.
So all the different choices that have to be made in how do we even tell a people's story?
Yeah, no, the National Museum of the American Indian is actually a great example because it has art, right? It has culture. It has what are some of the perceptions, right, of what it means to be American Indian, and then what it actually means, right, for different nations, different tribal nations. They have an excellent exhibit that traces the history of treaties between tribal nations or indigenous nations in of what later becomes the United States, and then eventually the United States. And what I like about that exhibit is that it shows viewpoints.
Yes.
So it really kind of captures what it meant to be coming to the table to negotiate a treaty from these different perspectives.
Yes.
So that's a fantastic museum. It's also very beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And I think that the exhibit that my class found so powerful in 2000 was at the top floor. There was an exhibit called We Are Still Here. Because I think so many times people think that Native Americans are frozen in time, right? And the point of the exhibit is we are evolving culture. Like, we are firefighters, we are lawyers, and we're not frozen in time. And just those visual representations, like you would enter the exhibit and there were holograms of Native Americans dressed in actual clothes like you and I are wearing, right? So these public history, it feels like it's such a craft that allows you to see and feel history in a way that just reading a book doesn't allow you to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think when people enter these museums, just that they're free, right? You can go in, you can experience it, for 5 minutes or for the full day, but that there's content and there's stories that people can relate to in a lot of different ways.
And the other thing I remember about the Native American Indigenous Museum is how closely they worked with communities in order to tell the story, right? So who gets to tell the history becomes so important.
And that's such an important effort. Lonnie Bunch, who is now the director of the Smithsonian, had a huge effort for restitution, right? Like to return remains and artifacts that belong to tribal nations. So that, that's part of the effort too, is kind of making amends with the past.
Yes.
Right? Of how history was done, how history was collected. The most recent museum to be constructed is the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's a stunning experience to go in. It's 6 levels tall, and it captures history as well as contemporary culture.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also a great celebration of achievements, of recognizing hardships and
Mm-hmm.
how people have survived different moments in the past.
Mm-hmm. And then they're working on launching a history of the Latino in America.
Yeah, so there are 2 new museums that have been kind of approved by Congress, or initiated. One is the National Museum of American Women. I can't remember if that's what it's called. And then the National Museum of the American Latino. And those haven't broken down. They haven't been constructed yet. But there's already, given these executive orders, questions of how they're going to forge ahead with so many parameters, right, that are dictating funds. So it will take creativity. It'll take a lot of support from communities to see them through.
Yeah. What is the Smithsonian Institution?
So the Smithsonian Institution is a collection of museums. It's the largest museum institute in the world, actually. It's made up of 21 different museums. So these museums cover themes and topics that range from science, technology, history, art. Many of them are found on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., so right there in the nation's capital. And so there are these individual museums that focus on American history or natural history, or the National Gallery of Art has the only Da Vinci, right, in the Western Hemisphere. The Air and Space Museum is the most visited museum. It's all about technology and flight and going to space. So they cover a range of topics. They are collections, right? So collections from Americans past of technological advancements, or just everyday experiences, right? Like the sit-ins, the counters at the diners for the sit-ins to protest segregation. So they also collect, right, items from the past to preserve and conserve and put on display so that the public can go and learn about America's past.
What are some of the famous objects that are at the Smithsonian's?
So some famous objects at the Smithsonian include the Star-Spangled Banner. So that's on display, and it's a really neat display because no direct light can hit it. So when you go into the exhibit hall where it's on display, it's all dark, and it tells the story of the Star-Spangled Banner and kind of the national flag. So that's probably the most well-known. Dorothy's ruby slippers used in The Wizard of Oz are held at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. So there's some pretty famous objects. There's also really everyday objects. When museum staff go around, start curating for an exhibit, they start looking for items that can help tell the story and gives folks a sense of, the history and the people behind these stories. So, for example, the sit-in lunch encounters in the South, the protest fighting segregation, that's held at the Smithsonian, and it's on display. And you used to be able to sit at this counter and listen and hear the shouts from segregationists, right, who wanted to preserve that way of life, and what the protesters endured sitting at that counter, and at that same counter. So there are, items from really prominent figures in America's past, but then also from everyday folks,
You worked on the exhibit Many Voices, One Nation. What objects did you choose to tell your story?
Yeah, so the curators came to me and they wanted to tell the story of Mexicanos who were here in California and experienced the arrival of Americans. And so they asked me what kind of objects would help tell this story. And I remember pointing them to the Rancho Camulos, which is up by Magic Mountain now, and told them, there was a chapel there that they practiced mass at. And so I think they got a rebozo, which is a shawl, to put on display. They have a cross, from the chapel. They have a railroad sign that was used at the rancho to kind of for the railroad stop, which was a huge achievement for this family to get a railroad stop on their property. So yeah, just different things, and it's tough, right? Like, what is one object? So I actually have my students pick an object from their own personal collection, and they have to tell a story in 100 words about that object.
Wow.
So it's a neat exercise to see what tells a story.
Yeah. That raises the question, like, if students watching these videos want to learn more, if students watching these videos want to learn more from you, where can they find you? What classes do you teach?
So I teach the Introduction to Public History, where we explore all of these. It's History 402A. I also teach History 402B, which is a practicum in public history, which is an applied class. So it's a project-driven class. So we actually approach this as like a staff and a team, and we do professional work. Right now, we're partnering with California State Parks, Pio Pico State Historic Park. We're building out some materials for them. I teach courses in U.S. women's history, U.S. social history.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Brown-Coronel, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much.